More than 3,000 years ago, in the river valleys north, south, east, and west of the Mississippi River, several groups of early Americans began to spread out and inhabit this large region rich in fertile soil. Because of the richness of the soil in the Mississippi River Valley, there was an abundance of the plants that could be harvested for food. There was also a wide variety of fruits and berries that could be gathered. In addition, there were long, winding freshwater rivers that were teeming or overflowing with fish. In the beginning, the groups of the people who lived in this region survived by hunting, fishing, and gathering. Then, while continuing to hunt, many of them also began to farm. As you heard earlier, farming provided groups of people with more reliable food supply. In particular, they began to grow sunflowers and squash. Later, they grew corn and beans. Because these early people began to farm the land, it became necessary for them to stay close to their crops. As a result, they began to construct permanent homes and settlements. As you heard earlier, once specific groups of people began to settle in certain regions, they began to develop their own unique cultures. These Native Americans built homes, developed languages, and learned new crafts and skills. Each group did these things in their own way, and their culture grew out of the area in which they lived. They also worshipped many nature gods and animal spirits. They were polytheistic, meaning they believed in more than one god. And they also created art, ornaments, and jewelry. But that is not all that they created. Just as the ancient Egyptians, Maya, Aztec, and Incas built giant structures that rose up toward the heavens, so did these early native people of eastern North America. They built amazing mounds. Some of the mounds were small with rounded tops. Others were flat-topped mounds. Others rose up into the sky like pyramids. Some were burial mounds, whereas others were strictly for ceremonial purposes. There were mounds shaped like animals too. Often the chief of the settlement was the most important leader and had his home built on top of the mound. Today, archaeologists call this early native culture the Mississippian culture. The Mississippians were one of the three distinct groups known as mound builders. These three groups, called the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippians, lived at different times in and around the region of North America. The Adena were one of the early groups of people to build mounds. They built mounds that ranged in size from less than 20 feet to more than 300 feet in diameter. Diameter is the area across a circle. These mounds functioned as earthen burial chambers and religious ceremonial sites. The Adena inhabited a large area near the Ohio River in what are now states of Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, and parts of Pennsylvania and New York. So, this group of mound builders had moved into some areas that were connected to the Mississippi River by the Ohio River, and some other areas that were quite a distance away from both rivers. The Adena lived in villages in circular homes with conical roofs, or roofs that looked like cones. These Native American homes were made from poles, tree branches, mud, and bark. The Adena hunted and gathered, and they also worked together to grow sunflowers, squash, and tobacco. Interestingly, the first group of mound builders did not grow corn. However, it is believed that they smoked tobacco, probably as a ritual during important religious ceremonies and celebrations. They are known to have traded these products with other native groups. When you consider how difficult it must have been to build mounds, it seems likely that developing a system and plan were strong aspects of the cultural identity of the Adena. Building a mound required a lot of people working together. They had to move tons of earth from one place to another with nothing more than baskets to hold it. Why did these Native Americans build mounds? Well, just as many ancient cultures, the reason was connected to the Adena's religious beliefs. Proper burial and honoring their ancestors was very important to them. Most of the people were cremated then when they died and placed in long tombs, which in turn placed inside the mound. However, important members and leaders of the group were not cremated. Their bodies were placed inside the mounds, and some of their personal belongings, such as beads, pipes, and flints, with each burial, more and more earth was placed on top of the mound. Archaeologists believe that the mounds began as smaller constructions and over many years became larger as more bodies and therefore more earth was added to them. The largest and most impressive Adena burial mound still evident in North America is in West Virginia, known as Grave Creek Mound. This is a modern name for the ancient site. More than 60,000 tons of soil was moved in the construction of this mound, and it is thought that they have taken more than 100 years to complete. But perhaps most interesting, Adena construction is the curved serpent mound in Ohio, which is not a burial mound, but an effigy mound. In this case, this effigy is a mound shaped into a 1,370-foot snake. The Adena believed in the power of animal spirits, and this one is thought to have been very important to the religious site. It is the largest effigy earthwork in the world. Gradually, however, the Adena culture merged with other cultures to become the next group of native mound builders, called the Hopewell. The Hopewell built well-constructed villages along riverbanks. They produced food by hunting, by gathering nuts, seeds, fruits, and roots, by farming, and by fishing. They used animal hides for clothing, mats, and homes. They made stone pipes, used copper, and, like the Adena, traded with other native people. Today, scientists believe that Hopewell sites show evidence of trade connections from the Rocky Mountains to Lake Superior to North Carolina, practically all across the entire continent. These sites also revealed what extraordinary artists the Hopewell were. Archaeologists know this from artifacts that have survived, including decorative pottery in the shapes of animals and human beings. Hopewell mounds were even bigger than the Adena mounds. It's possible that these mounds were used not only for burial purposes, but also for ceremonial temples, and perhaps even for defense purposes. In addition to providing high ground in the time of flooding within Hopewell settlements, tribal and religious leaders would have had a significant amount of power. The Hopewell had rules, just as the societies do, designated to help large groups of people in one place. Chiefs and religious leaders were often responsible for enforcing these rules. The final prehistoric culture of the North American mound builders was the Mississippian culture. This was perhaps the most developed mound culture of all. They were a people who relied upon corn as their most important food crop. They lived in large towns, sometimes referred to as city-states. They were populated by hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The largest Mississippian town was Cahokia in Missouri. Within each Mississippian town, there were several mounds, but the most important mound was a flat-top mound upon which sat a religious temple or ruler's home. The flat-top mound was usually constructed in a central plaza. Mississippian mounds were several stories high and were symbols of the people's religious beliefs. The Mississippians worshiped the sun and their ancestors. They were expert craftspeople, artists, and builders. The people were governed by powerful leaders and priests, and their religious beliefs touched every aspect of their lives. When Europeans came to North America, they encountered the Mississippian people. The largest mound in this town is one of the mounds that's still in existence today and is known as Monk's Mound. It covers an area of 16 acres. It is larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Over a very long period of time, thousands of mounds were constructed by these three distinct groups of people: the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippians. This Mississippian mound is in Georgia. None of the names mentioned here are native names. We do not know what these people called their mounds, or even what they called themselves. Ironically, it is the mounds that provide us with a window to the past. After thousands of years, the mounds and the artifacts that have been discovered in and around them speak to us of a long time ago, before Europeans came to this continent. They speak of a time when native people worshipped many gods of nature and lived. They speak of a time when native peoples worshipped many groups of nature gods and lived out their lives freely on this land.